It means, first, we need to be able to bring under the vocal folds a pressure that is superior to the one we have above. So we have to do some kind of work to have this. How are we going to do this? One way is to use the muscles that we use for proper breathing, diaphragm, the rib muscles, meaning the intercostal muscles. They are intercostal, they are inhalatory and expiratory, and they both work in breathing, and they both work to maintain or to control the pressure. Of course, the diaphragm, probably I just said. Some of you, as I said in the first episode, the abdominals, yeah, absolutely. We have the idea that there are others, and Alexander technique works on some of the others. And I have the idea it's the multi-FID, meaning that it's a deep spinal stabilizer. But I will talk about that later on, and it's something on which I'm doing some hypotheses, so I will talk, but not too much. But take the idea that you can control the flow, the pressure, and the air into the lungs by the same muscles that put the air into or put the air out. Simply one way we do that in the old school, and by old school we intend the traditional bel canto technique that was Italian mostly, that it is a technique very refined, very effective, of very great capacity in having the instrumental capacities of the voice, and it remains as a gold standard, how can I say, practice to have in mind and to know, even if you don't want to train in that, because it was the first having some concept that remain true and sometimes not explained by science yet, and not explained by other kind of technique yet useful, because knowledge is a step-by-step process, so we don't understand everything immediately, probably we will not understand everything at all at the end, but the process is to get in more refined with more tools, more options, and so better choices and a greater amplitude of choices and of styles and of applications. So I come back. Why bel canto use that? Because you must have the idea that you can control the pressure by putting more air into the lungs and opposing a bit the air to go out. How much air you can put into the lungs? How much you want for singing? We have to see from a biological point of view if the lungs love a lot of air, or how they function with a lot of air or with little air. The lungs, since they are made with those fragile materials in the respiratory part, they do not like too much to be overinflated. What it means overinflated? Meaning that they are all fully inflated of air, and then you use your muscle to put other inside. Does that mean that you cannot inflate the lungs to have enough pressure for singing? No, because you can use the pressure made just by the volumes into the lungs and the elastic tissue of the lungs, that since they can expand quite a lot, they are quite elastic. So you can, when you put the air into the lungs and they expand, part of the force of this air entering will be absorbed into the elastic capacity of the lung tissues. And this is one way of having a sort of spring-like force that will apply under the glottis. So the quantity of air you put inside and the quantity of expansion will matter to give you how much pressure you will have under the glottis. want more pressure than this, you can do something that Belcanto did, that was you oppose with external from the lungs point of view, muscles to the expansion. So you create an artificial, elastic other capacity to absorb the energy you're putting. And yet you have to understand that you don't oppose with the inhalatory muscles, but you oppose with the expiratory muscles. And this is something that Michael Trimble, I put here the page of his book, no, I put here the book, sorry, with the number of the page, it's because you can take his book, it's really extraordinary. It is one of the way with which, in especially classical technique, or where you want to have a large extension and a great capacity into the control, the instrumental control of the voice for some jazz singers, from some musical theatre singers, and at the same time having enough of the pressure to control not to have too much vibrato and not to have a too much soft system. Okay? This instrumental quality, it is usually a capacity you acquire here, but especially into the breath management. The breath management is the sum of the lungs, air, internal and isolated capacity, and the instrumental capacity of the respiratory muscles. The volume of the lungs changes according to the size of the subject and the position, postural position of the subject. Also that will be into the breath management. We will have an episode on breath management. But now it was to say, to work on the pressure of the air under the glottis, we have different systems and different systems, strategies that works in synergistic way, exactly as the intrinsic and extrinsic muscle of the larynx, as we said last time, to sum up their contribution. And this will give the capacity of changing a lot of parameters into your voice. But this is a continuum, how much you use one of those, and when you sum up it becomes more relevant the other ones, the other system, the postural or the respiratory. What also tells us for, how can I say, singing point of view, the fact that the upper part of the lungs is more stiff, yet is more stiff, and it needs more pressure to expand a little. It means that if it is properly done and properly used, it can be an advantage, because it can give you a lot of pressure without going to stress too much your lungs, because you are not getting the upper part just on the top of yet a great pressure from the lower expansion part. And also there, how you do that? You just don't let the lower part of what you can control, meaning the muscles around the lungs and the rib cage, to expand in the lower part too much. So you'll have a total volume into the lungs not so big, and a great pressure and a great stiffness quite close to the vocal folds. I said well done, because you can exceed. What happens if you put too much pressure under the vocal folds? That what you are going to stiffen, it will be not only the tract of the trachea and of the lungs and the upper part of the respiratory system, but there is a point in which you can stiffen too much also all the tissues into the larynx and going round they are around the vocal cords and the muscular part of the vocal cords. And you can stiffen so much that the extrinsic muscles of the larynx will not be able to move appropriately the larynx, meaning in biomechanical terms, you can make too narrow the range of motion. What is too narrow? Too narrow is when you cannot have the enough range of motion for an healthy voice production or for your style related voice production. And this varies widely. And this is something that from the classical point of view you don't understand, because you think that it must be the softer, the most elastic, the more mobile possible, the more relaxed possible. In some kind of classical techniques, yes, but at the same time some like Corelli, some like Di Stefano, some like exceeding Caruso. Caruso did it too much, he did bring it too far for his system, so he had some nodules, and then he had to come back and to cut back a little, and then he started singing again, always exceeding a bit for his system. They used to stiffen much more than what is tradition now. In some musical theatre technique, you stiffen much more. For the classical, I say classical meaning the American classical belting Broadway style, you put a lot of the air exactly also in the upper parts. Now we get to have more adduction of the vocal folds with proper pressure, but not that much. Because from a stylistic point of view, the more the air makes the work and less the intrinsic larynx muscles, the more you perceive someone technical into the style but less individual. You take away a bit of the movement and the adduction that the words are going to create, because the more you use the air, the less you can use there. There is a balance that is a perfect balance, and that was the Italian bel canto for classical styles, and now some jet singers. But at the same time you have all ratios of possibilities, and those are those in which the styles find their places and their happy places. I come back a little. Where was I? Yeah, the air. To maintain the flow, you have to balance what? The closure of the vocal folds, and so the opposition that the larynx and intrinsic larynx muscles can do to the coming out of the air, that it's something that is the closure that we use to avoid that the other contact with the external tube that we have, that is the digestive system, meaning avoiding that the food goes into the lungs. Also when we close, to stiffen the system and to make some effort. As you see here, the great coach Don Saladino shows, I put the link, I put just the photo, you can get to see by yourself. It asks this client to make an inhalation, so it will exert a force into the segment, the thoracic segment. This effort, this expansion will get to the muscles she will use for that lift. And again here we have something in common that has been, in my view, well seen by Alexander of the Alexander technique. We can use both ways. We can use for physical, but we can use also for singing. Or we can use for singing what they use for physical activities, because just you have to adapt to the function that you want. And also the larynx we close to make possible this effort and to maintain the stiffness. In some sort it does that when we sing the today recap.